Good day. Welcome to another episode of the National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens Black Table Talk podcast. I'm here today with none other than
Mr. Antoine Coleman.
welcome to the podcast, my friend. How are you today?
Man, honored to be here. I'm feeling wonderful, man.
Wonderful. Happy New Year's to you, my brother.
Hey, same to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So we're going to dive in today. And, for those of you all who are listening, we are here to speak truth to power and put perspective in terms of why we invest in people and not prisons as it relates to returning citizens. And so we have a special guest today here, Mr. Antoine Coleman, as you just heard. And he's going to give us his perspective as he retells or shares a little bit of his story as a returning citizen and how he's overcome barriers to reentry himself. So I want to kick it off, Mr. Coleman, with the question, and this may be to help our listeners out. Can you share a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Okay, I was born and raised in D.C., particularly Southeast. I lived in various parts of D.C., Northeast. That's where I started out. A lot of my family from over there. I have two sisters, one older, one younger. Single parent household. Love school. I was all, really into like creative writing and spelling bees and stuff like that.
I love it.
Love sports and stuff,
Yeah, that's sweet. I love the fact that, you can reminisce from that time in your life. So how would you describe or briefly describe your life before you were incarcerated? Maybe what your community was like, family, what maybe some of your future goals and aspirations were as a young child before you got involved in the legal system? Just to, put things in perspective for our listeners.
Yeah, of course. I would say, at the time we moved to Southeast D.C., that's when, the crack epidemic was really just starting. And so at that time, it really affected so many households. It was so new. Just thinking back on it, like when it first started, realizing that, it had also affected my household and my mom. And, I think, it just led to the violent years into the 90s. And so it was just more like survival. Everything just seemed so desperate. And it was really tough back in those times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, when you say that the crack epidemic and then the community and environment that kind of festers or nurtures that negative behavior that could possibly have a challenging impact on a child or any black man, growing up in a situation like that. Mm-hmm. So what was so you said you were raised by your mom. So was your dad in the picture or was your parents in the picture?
No, my dad wasn't around at all. I probably can count how many times I actually saw him on one hand. And he actually didn't come around until like close to my incarceration, where I started to see him more. And so he played a big factor, like, the first few years into the incarceration. But for the most part, he wasn't present in raising me at all.
So as you continue to paint this picture, what was young, Antoine Coleman, aspiring and future hopes and dreams? What was your your North Star at that time in your life?
I always had an inclination towards reading and like learning every possible thing. If it was a particular subject, whether I remember I was young, I got intrigued by snakes for whatever reason. So I went to the library and I probably read every book on snakes. I just checked it out, right? I would never own one to this day or nothing, but it was just, I'm just saying, as far as like how much of an avid reader I was, how curious I was, always willing to learn. My interest in school, like I say, I was more into like creative writing, poetry. I was pretty good writing essays. I participated in spelling bees and things of that nature. I would say I was really interested in school.
Yeah.
I was pretty interested in school.
Nice. We got a future Langston Hughes in the room. Y'all hear this?
Man,
Okay.
yeah.
I love that. So in transitioning in our conversation, right? So that was, Coleman, at that time, that age, that perspective of your life. So on the day your life changed, when you entered into the legal system, put perspective in that for those of our listeners who may want insight to your story about how that came to be.
Like I say, drugs had affected my household in a way. I think people don't really understand that the same understanding and comprehension that a child has in school, those honor roll students, they pick up at home just as fast as well. And so I say that to say I think I was bothered the most by my mother's addiction because I was considered like the brains of the house, but they not processing that I'm picking up everything. And so, I think it was like an anger and a frustration and a inner rage and, not understanding. And I carried that into school. And I was fighting more. I was irritable more. And you don't really understand, how, is not natural because everybody around you kind of live in the same way. And so, I believe that, my household issues, the community, it really led to my behavior. And to the point I just got kicked out of too many schools. And I just fell to the streets and just really, 'cause by 16, my mom had abandoned us. And so that really left me on my own. And so it was just survival mode at a violent time in the city. And those decisions that manifested from those times is what led me to prison by 21.
Right. I see. Thank you for putting that into perspective and explaining how the environment, the situation, the mental state that you were in, the self-esteem that you had shaped your your mindset and your behavior began to change. So were there any defining moments during your time, after you had basically got involved in the legal system because of that, shift in behavior and the choices that you were making because of the environment that you lived in, during your time inside that helped shift your perspective on inspiring your journey to change?
I think something I did learn over time, not to skip over too much, but like a person, you are who you are at the core of you. And I say that to say, like, within my first 2 years, even though I had got sentenced to 66 years to life, within my first 2 years, I still acquired my GED. And I was kicked out of school in the 8th grade.
Wow.
And so even with a life sentence, I acquired my GED. And I never stopped learning. I attained certifications. I was a wellness coach. I went on to be a GED tutor for a few years when I was in Alabama. And so, I think, that, like I say, that inclination towards wanting to learn, wanting to teach, I think it overwhelmed me to the point where it kind of forced me to make better decisions, to be in a position to do those positive things.
I like what you said about, you said you had a life sentence, right? You went in when you were 16, you said? And
no, 21.
Oh, 21, I'm sorry.
Stuff started going bad at 16.
Stuff, right, the change, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that. But I like what you said about your perspective and your programming around really being intentional about self-care in terms of like education, like you said, getting your GED. You said you were mentoring, right? And even though you might have been in a situation where the legal system, had custody of you, you still seemed to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You still could see, Antoine in the situation. Go ahead, Antoine, in what you were going through, but you were able to basically invest in yourself and say, you know what, I can take control of, you know, my life, even in a situation like I'm in now
Right.
that may seem hopeless.
Yeah. You know, because it's some things that just come with doing time in prison. That you know, and it is what it is. But it was things where I reached a point where I say, you know what, it's some things I can do better, as far as like just making better decisions. Whether it was my relationships with people, my work ethic, how I dealt with people, how I communicated, realizing my own trauma and how that affected how I communicated and dealt with people. And so like it was stages for me, but I think I found a lot of satisfaction and solace in making better decisions and being in better positions. You know, because my first half, you know, it was full of because I hadn't had a juvenile record or adult record.
Right.
So this life sentence, I was sent all the way to from D.C. to Beaumont, Texas, which was at the time was the worst penitentiary in the country.
Talk about it.
You know, and so like that's where I started at, and I was only there like a couple of months, and I ended up in a hole for almost 2 years. But I say it was during that time where I studied while I was back there, but I also wrote a novel while I was back there.
Wow.
And so being able to write that novel, I think it kind of like took my mind out of prison before it even settled on prison, if that makes sense. And so even by the time I got out the hole, I was sent to Florida. My mind was on publishing this book. Because, see, these are all things I had control over, even in that situation. I can still do things. And so, yeah, I think, like I say, education just was always my guiding light, I guess.
And that's beautiful. That is absolutely, like you say, when you're in a dark place looking for hope, looking for a way out mentally, you found solace in writing and reading. What was the name of or the title of your novel?
Well, I ended up writing two. The first one is Never Die Young.
Never Die Young.
Never Die Young.
By Antoine Coleman, y'all. Y'all hear that? What is the story about? Just to, you know, a sneak peek, I guess, just to give some insight while you were writing that. Never Die Young.
You know, at that time when I first entered the system, like urban novels had really took off, but I hadn't read nothing that really captured the essence of how it really is. Well, at least it was for me. And so I wanted to really highlight the other things that came with. I think they glorified the negative parts of it, as opposed to like a lot of decisions and things be made from loyalty, be made from you know, other things, man, that happens outside of what they depict. You know, and I wanted to really show that.
Yeah, it's a commercial perspective of what's going on in the legal system, especially when you lock down, when you're behind bars, and then there's the reality of that situation.
Exactly. And, you know, and the reality of what leads to those decisions. You know what I'm saying? You just don't wake up or you say, I want to go shoot and rob somebody. A lot of us were victimized before we ever victimized anyone.
Talk about it.
You know, like I was robbed probably twice before I ever tried to rob somebody. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
we're living in a state of trauma. We kind of traumatized before we even take to the streets, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, the streets ain't really do it to you. You kind of messed up before you even go out there.
Yeah, I that's such a sweet idea, and it's real because when we think about what you just said, Mr. Coleman, especially when it's like there's a working or there's an inner working at play that a lot of Black and brown communities are, you know, forced into, you know, born into, so to speak, like you're getting at. And many people are turning a blind eye to the school to prison pipeline. You know, 8th grade is just a reality of a situation that you had faced, telling your story, and then how you got involved in the legal system. But here it is, that same, you know, hamster wheel story, that same blueprint, that same yellow brick road that we seem to find so many Black and brown brothers faced with that reality, right? And it is time to do more to change that, you know. And even when you talked about your experience in the incarceration system or in the legal system, in writing your 2 novels and being in the whole and, traveling around the whole country because, DC does not have a system to take care of its own citizens without moving them, across the 50 states or so to speak. So now that you came to that realization, like you said, that you were going to take control of your life even while you were inside and not have a pity party around the situation that you had kind of reconciled yourself to given the circumstances that life presented to you and it seemed like nobody cared, what would you say is the defining factor of now you switching from, your day when you found out that your life was going to be able to change, you were going to be able to come out of that cage, you were going to be able to, be free, and how and what led up to your, freedom from incarceration to post incarceration?
Oh man, I think because I ended up serving almost 22 years, and I say
to put that in perspective for our listeners, you were 21 going in, and you how old coming out?
Well, I'm going to be 45. What I was 42, 43, but almost
right.
22 years.
Yeah,
A little math, a little messed up. So I came out like 43, I think.
I got you.
Yeah, and and so it was like 10 years into it was the roughest. That's when I was really all over the country. Out of that 22 years, I probably did 7 years in the whole. I was in the disciplinary program. I've been everywhere from Pennsylvania, Mississippi, Colorado, West Virginia, Kentucky, Alabama, but I think it was when I was off the compound like 4 years straight, and it was just something was like, you know what? Even though, because I had a strong desire like to still do things for my daughter, like even from prison. And so I knew I could still do things, even just make myself available for her to talk to, be able to send her money, just something, right? And so I said, that's what kind of inspired, like, you know what? It's certain things I can change about me to keep myself in position for her. And so I think putting somebody else ahead of me kind of guided like my decisions. Because I told her, I said, it's like, I can't explain to you I got into it about a TV in prison or a candy bar.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if I can't explain it to you, I'm not going to do it.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Right.
Yeah, it made prison sense.
Yeah.
Not street sense.
Right.
And I kept my focus on street sense and not prison sense.
Yeah. It's a good point, especially when you're talking about young people, right? A loved one of yours, and particularly in this situation, right? And it's certain conversations that, you open up to a young person or a child, it's not going to translate the same, right? And then it's also the intentionality in sharing your story, right? Because of the love, because of the desire to change the outcome for Black and brown communities, starting with your own lived experience, is so important. It's so vital what you share to your daughter. So I applaud you for, taking up space for a lot of family reunification that is a challenge in our legal system. If I'm in Florida, if I'm in Texas, like you were, that makes it that much harder for a loved one, for our brothers and sisters who are in the system to this very day, who are experiencing that level of disconnect from their loved ones. I thank you for putting perspective in that lived experience for those people who may say, that resonates with me. I connect with that. So it's interesting because we didn't talk about this yet, but you got released on the IRA, right?
I got released on IRA.
And I brought that up because we have, been talking about lived circumstances, the community, the impact that the larger world around us plays into that, school to prison pipeline. But for our listeners who need context of what IRA is, how it began to change and affect your life, and what happened based on the judge's, understanding of that particular, it's a law, right?
It's a law
that benefits individuals who, I'm gonna let you tell it.
Yeah. when they first the first the first time they passed it, let's say IRA 1, I don't know a particular name, let's say IRA 1.
Okay.
And so those were like, it's just for juveniles, all the guys who caught cases like up to 17 years old. And so I knew so many of them, and I was so happy for a lot of them. I had caught my case, I was 20. And so, like, I wasn't optimistic at all about catching any breaks for violence. It was a blessing for them, and the fact they were juveniles, I was like, okay, it made sense. I had no optimism for me. But at the time when they passed IRA, I was in that transition phase. I was saying, when I started making better decisions and putting my daughter, ahead of my own personal feelings and interests and stuff. And so I was in position after they passed the first IRA. That's when I was still tutoring. I was a suicide companion. I had wellness classes. So when they passed, when they were talking about passing the second part, which extended the age group up to before you turn 25, because science acknowledged that a man's mind doesn't develop to 25 years old. So that's what lifted the threshold for me.
Right.
So I fell under that 25.
Yes, sir.
And so what I did personally, like, I wrote the public defender office, like the particular branch that deal with petitions, before they even passed that law. I was like, look, I'm a good candidate. I got this going on.
Right.
And long story short, they plugged me in with a law firm, and it was on from there.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. I must say, what you just shared, Mr. Coleman, my heart kind of, skipped a beat in terms of the fact that so many people, myself included, I'm a justice impacted individual, and my experience is not so closely related to being, behind bars, but the experience that I did have in terms of what you were talking about, the care that you had for your fellow man, even in a dark situation, like you said, being a mentor, being a suicide, a peer navigator. So, through that process of suicidal ideation, your education that you continue to read, right? You said welding, and all of that made me think that, there are people who are going to hear this message and be encouraged that is like, we are all to be service unto our fellow man, and to have that humanity. So, just me now listening to that, like I said, it shifted my perspective on, the intentionality around us continuing to question, why are we investing in prisons and not investing in people? And this whole IRA policy, like you say, once the snowballing started with, you said you were proactive. You're like, I'm gonna write this public defender office and put my case before them. So that's a beautiful thing, man. That is an absolute beautiful thing.
Yeah, I really push for myself, man.
Right.
So yeah, it's just been a blessing. It's definitely a blessing.
So I want to continue on with this conversation now. You talked about your release, from the IRA law that played very favorably in your case. So we know the story doesn't stop there, though, right? Me, myself included. Yeah. There are barriers now on the other side of your freedom that you face as well. And so just to continue to tell your story, your lived experience, what was that part of your reentry story as far as post incarceration now, and what you now face trying to reintegrate back into society?
Man, it's challenges seen and unseen. I think the unseen challenges are more of the challenge for a lot of us. Because you lived a certain way for a long time, and you come out and into a fast-paced world, And so you have to manage all of these different things all at one time. And you've been gone over 2 decades. And so, like, you're going to have your anxieties, you're going to have your frustrations and things like that. But I think giving yourself grace is the biggest thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, understanding, like, you're not going to get it all. Certain things going to come with time. And just consciously just working on certain stuff. I was fortunate upon my release, well, right before I got released, I was in this program when I was 16 and called the Arch program. And my lawyers, when they was putting together my case, they reached out. Long story short, they ended up founding one of the founders of it. And he was ecstatic to help me write letters for me. He is like a developed person, but his wife was a social worker. She the one started the Arch program. He put the business mind into
Right.
it.
Okay.
And so, long story short, he hired me at his art gallery before I was even released from prison. So I had a job. So I was hired there as a resident artist for poetry.
Right.
So that was my first job. I'm talking, I walked down there like 3 days out of prison.
What?
And so that put me in the setting of meeting so many wonderful people, the creators, the artists. And I think that played a big factor. Like, it really helped me coming out, because I fell into what I always wanted to do: art, create, inspire through art. So, like, yeah, it's just
it's such a moment, you know. Excuse me, I clear my throat. It's such a moment in what you just shared, Antoine, and I know there are other returning citizens who are going to come home and need that reunification. I'm gonna use that term. What was that? What was that?
Yeah.
They're gonna need that reunification. The fact that someone from your childhood, you know, decades ago, thought enough of you and your purpose, your passion, you know, your self-realization of what you were called to do. Like you say, you want to give back, you want to serve, you want to actually love thy neighbor, right? And the opportunity open up speaks to the work that we all need to do. You know what I mean? When it comes to the injustices around individuals like ourselves, that people may not know our stories, right? They may not know these realities, coming home and thinking that, like, I like how you said it earlier, there's a perspective about what's going on the inside that's commercialized, and it's fake news. And then it's the same thing when we come home and we trying to, you know, get our life back together. So many people hearing your story, you know, on this podcast are going to hear that testimony and say, you know what, there is hope, there is encouragement, there is a successful reentry story, and you telling it, Antoine.
And there's plenty of them. You know, I think that's one of the biggest things, like changing people's perception of us. You know, not taking into account, man, we were traumatized kids that was like really wasn't equipped to make a lot of better decisions. And so, but we're not terrible people. And I do want to share one thing I did find in common in prison over time was a lot of the so-called leaders, or like the ones they labeled as what is it, like you the head of a gang and
gatekeeping.
Yeah, like you a head of a gang, like on the streets and stuff,
right? Okay.
But a lot of those guys were the most educated ones.
Right.
A lot of those guys were the ones who supported each other the most. Some of my closest partners might have been the head Latin King, the top GD. I used to play Scrabble with one of the most respected Mexican mafia people. You know, I had a Nathaniel who introduced me. That's a northern, like from a Northern California gang.
Okay.
Who introduced me to Greek philosophy. I didn't know nothing about Socrates and Plato. And so I wanted to share, like, you know, a lot of the, you know, who they labeled as leaders of these gangs or different people are some of the most intelligent and kind men you'll meet. They don't mention that these same guys They might have led a gang, but they made sure their little brother was going to school.
Right.
They made sure mom ain't have to worry about certain things. And so this who you took from society as well.
Yeah.
They just applied that leadership to the wrong occupation, but they still leaders and good men.
Man, say it again. Say it again. It's like you said. And then Brian Stevenson encapsulates that same philosophy, right? We are more than the sum total of our, mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That can't be stressed enough, Antoine. Like you said, literally what you just said. They took that same person out the community, but here, look at their heart. Look at this person who, like you say, is gifted and talented and has aspiration and dreams. And even I think about the idea that you can get beauty for ashes when all you have to work with is ashes. There's still beauty in what you just said and what you're talking about. And I've been encouraged by that too. Is there anything else you want to say about that perspective? I think, as we continue this dialogue around misconceptions and stigmas, it helps illuminate and bring intentionality around the work that has to still be done,
Yeah, that's why I continue to push for those guys that's still in, because man, I know, ones who for you to be in such a dark place, and some got life sentences, or only thing on most of their mind is helping somebody else. If you ask them, man, they get out, all they saying is what they gonna do for their grandson, what they gonna do for their daughter, what they gonna do for their mom house, how they gonna bring the family back, how they gonna start this program. That's extraordinary when you're in such a dark place, when the only thing you can think about is helping other people. And a lot of us was left for ourselves. So you had all reason not to care about people.
Right. Absolutely.
So how could you not invest in two spirits like that?
Yeah, I like that. Two spirits. All you gotta do is light a match, and it'll turn into a flame. You know what I mean? And it'll burn bright.
I really believe, a lot of us, especially in our community, man, we so gifted, so talented. We seen it coming up, in our friends and our family. And it's like all of us, we have those different seeds to make it that we was gifted with. But we don't water those seeds. When I came up and I was into creative writing, I can't think of a program or anybody around me, even the school itself, that watered that seed of creativity in me or my peers.
Right. Where was the after school program, the arts and the humanities being poured into me, as a black man in a world where it seemed like neglect and othering and me being left to my own vices was the only way for me to fight out of a terrible situation. I resonate with that, and I'm sure so many of our listeners, want to call people out and call an action to that, right? Like let's address it. Now let's not, leave the work undone, and then another generation of black and brown people find themselves in the legal system, hopeless, no hope, all because we know, like you just said, and we can kind of probably think about this. Why aren't things being done to foster, that creativity, to foster your aspirations, hopes, and dreams,
Exactly. Now you just got another kid who was born to draw, had an eye for art, but he can't afford paper. He don't have pencils. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He don't know the difference between abstract and watercolor. He was never taught that.
Wow.
He don't know the difference between oil paint and pastels. He just know how to draw. But there's no water in that seed for that kid.
Right.
And so, if you can't water it and you can't build on this gift and build a life or a living out of it, then you chances are you're going to fall into something you probably don't want to do.
Yeah.
Even if it's a job you don't want, it ain't got to be the streets.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that up because, as we, continue our conversation, post your time in the legal system and, how you were able to get back on your feet, so to speak, and all that you just shared about how you stayed motivated, you know what I mean? And your continual drumbeat in your storytelling today around, service unto others has just resonated with me. And I want to give you a chance to kind of connect that to your life's work that you're doing now. I know you've been involved with Free Minds. You're now with Voices for a Second Chance, and the work continues, like you said.
Yeah, I think from working at the art gallery, I was able to do poetry shows, which I was able to bring like different members of the community all under one roof and do poems together. But at the same time, that's when I was working with Free Minds as a poet ambassador, where I went to like different schools, whether it was Georgetown, Curl, elementary schools, Brookland Middle School, World Bank. I've been a lot of places, but where I can use poetry and